What if your intelligence isn't a gift, but a threat? Jordan Peterson warned that society doesn't just misunderstand smart people, it fears them. Why? Because thinkers who question the status quo expose truths that shatter illusions. And in a world addicted to comfort, that makes you dangerous. Imagine for a moment living in a society where comfort is more valuable than progress. A society where individuals would rather uphold a flawed system than face the discomfort of change. Intelligence, real intelligence, is disruptive. It forces people to confront their own weaknesses, their illusions, and the fragility of their beliefs. And here's the crux of the issue. Most people would rather live in a bubble, even if that bubble is built on falsehoods, rather than embrace the discomfort of truth. That's where you come in. If you are someone who sees beyond the surface, who asks difficult questions, who challenges norms and conventions, then you pose a direct threat to the very fabric of that bubble. The world we live in thrives on conformity, on staying within the bounds of what is familiar, safe, and comfortable. Intelligent people, by nature, don't conform. They see patterns, connections, and flaws in systems that others don't, and they have the audacity to point them out. And this is what society can't handle. Your intelligence isn't celebrated. It's suppressed, silenced, and in some cases, even feared. The truth is that society has always feared those who think deeply, who see things differently, who refuse to simply accept what they are told. Because the moment you start asking the tough questions, the entire structure begins to tremble. By the end of this video, you'll never see your mind the same way again. You'll realize that your intelligence, the very thing that makes you feel isolated and misunderstood, is also your greatest weapon, and the reason why the world tries so hard to suppress it. Intelligent people don't just ask questions, they unravel systems. They look at the world, not as it appears, but as it truly is. Jordan Peterson argues that society labels them arrogant or disruptive, not because they're wrong, but because they're right. You see, the problem is never about intelligence itself. It's about what intelligence represents. Think of the great thinkers throughout history. Socrates, for example, wasn't executed because he was wrong. He was poisoned for corrupting the youth, for encouraging them to think critically and question the established norms of society. His crime? Challenging the status quo and empowering others to do the same. Galileo was another victim of society's fear of intelligence. He wasn't imprisoned because he was wrong. He was imprisoned because he had the audacity to prove that the Earth orbits the sun, a truth that directly contradicted the teachings of the Church. His intelligence didn't just challenge religious beliefs, it challenged the authority of those in power. And that's exactly why society fears smart people. Because intelligence exposes the cracks in the system. It reveals the lies, the hypocrisies, and the flaws that those in control would rather keep hidden. But here's the thing. This fear isn't always overt. In today's world, the suppression of intelligence is much more subtle. Instead of outright punishment, society finds quieter, more insidious ways to silence those who think critically. You're labeled as too intense when you ask probing questions, too critical when you point out flaws in a system, or not a team player when you refuse to go along with the groupthink. It's a form of social control, designed to keep you in line, to make you doubt yourself, and to ensure that you don't disrupt the status quo. This isn't about you being wrong, it's about their fear of losing control. When you challenge the accepted narrative, you make people uncomfortable, and discomfort, for many, is unbearable. The moment you begin to question the established order, you become a threat to the system. Society thrives on maintaining control, whether that's control over information, control over behavior, or control over beliefs. Intelligent people disrupt that control. They introduce uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes fear. Think about it. From a young age, we are conditioned to believe that intelligence is something to be celebrated. We're told that smart people go far in life, that intelligence is a gift. But what they don't tell you is that this gift comes with a cost. The more you think, the more you see. And the more you see, the more you threaten the established order. Those in power, whether in politics, education, religion, or business, have a vested interest in keeping things as they are. Your intelligence, your ability to see through the facade, threatens that stability. Let's not forget the intellectuals of the 20th century. many of whom were silenced for their ideas. Writers, philosophers, scientists, many found themselves exiled, imprisoned, or worse, simply because their ideas posed a threat to the prevailing power structures. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian writer, exposed the horrors of the Soviet gulags, a truth the regime wanted desperately to suppress. His intelligence, his ability to document and expose the reality of Soviet oppression, made him an enemy of the state. His books were banned, and he was eventually exiled. What we see today is no different. Society may not throw people into prisons for their ideas as often anymore, but it finds other ways to suppress critical thinkers. Social media algorithms reward conformity, echo chambers discourage dissenting opinions, and intellectuals are often painted as elitist or out of touch. But here's the reality. It's not about being too smart or too critical. It's about the fact that your intelligence exposes the flaws in their systems, and that is what they fear most. When you begin to think for yourself, to question the narratives you've been fed, you become a mirror that reflects back the inadequacies and insecurities of those around you. And no one likes to be reminded of their own limitations. This is why intelligent people are often ostracized or marginalized. Your ability to see through the lies and ask the tough questions forces others to confront their own ignorance. And for many, that is too much to bear. As Jordan Peterson puts it, society doesn't fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence reveals. The truth is uncomfortable, and most people would rather live in comfortable ignorance than face the harsh reality of their own limitations. That's why, when you begin to think critically, when you start to unravel the systems around you, society will try to put you back in your place. You'll be told to stop asking so many questions, to stop being so intense, to just go along with the group. But that's not because you're wrong. It's because your intelligence threatens the very foundation of their world. So why does your brain trigger their survival instinct? Why does society feel the need to silence you, to label you, to make you feel like an outsider? It's because your intelligence represents a challenge to the status quo, a status quo that many people are deeply invested in maintaining. You don't just ask questions, you unravel the very systems that keep them safe. And that to them is the ultimate threat. Let's dive deeper. Jordan Peterson says intelligence forces people to confront their own inadequacies. Imagine walking into a room where everyone's pretending to know the answer. Everybody's wearing the mask of competence, nodding along, engaging in surface-level dialogue, avoiding the deeper, more difficult questions. Then you walk in, and instead of playing along, you expose the truth. You actually know the answer, or at least you have the courage to admit that no one else does. What happens next? Their defense mechanism kicks in: attack, ridicule, ostracism. It's not that they hate you, it's that your presence forces them to confront a reality they'd rather avoid. Their illusion of competence, their carefully constructed facade of knowingness, crumbles in the face of true intelligence. Peterson calls this phenomenon the tyranny of the herd. It's the collective pressure of society to maintain a sense of uniformity and mediocrity, to keep everyone within the same intellectual boundaries. In this context, intelligence isn't just an asset, it's a threat to the group dynamic. It's a challenge to the unspoken rules that keep everyone comfortable. And this threat manifests in the form of ridicule, mockery, or outright cancellation. You're not punished for being smart, you're punished for revealing that they're not. It's an instinctive reaction. When people feel intellectually inferior, they lash out. It's easier to tear you down than to elevate themselves. This is why smart people, deep thinkers, often find themselves isolated or misunderstood. But here's the twist. Their fear isn't about your IQ. It's not the raw intelligence that bothers them. It's about something far deeper, far more primal. What they truly fear is your refusal to play their game. Intelligence that plays by the rules, that conforms, that doesn't challenge the herd, society tolerates that. But intelligence that questions, that refuses to follow blindly, that pushes boundaries, that's the kind of intelligence society fears. It's not your intellect that disrupts them. It's your unwillingness to settle for mediocrity, your insistence on pursuing truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Peterson argues that society doesn't reward those who are smart for the sake of being smart. It rewards those who use their intelligence to reinforce the existing structure. If you use your mind to question that structure, to ask the difficult questions that others shy away from, you become an outcast, you become dangerous. The problem is not that society doesn't value intelligence, it's that it only values intelligence that serves its own ends. Thinkers, philosophers, and innovators who question the system are often pushed to the fringes, labeled as rebels or troublemakers. This is the essence of the tyranny of the herd. Society functions like a herd, moving together, following the same paths, the same rules, and the same traditions. Anyone who steps outside of those lines, anyone who dares to think differently, is seen as a threat. And the herd reacts violently to protect itself. It's a defense mechanism, not against you as a person, but against what you represent, the possibility of change, of disruption, of being exposed. The reason this happens is that intelligence, real intelligence, challenges the status quo. It doesn't accept things at face value. It questions, probes, and seeks to understand the deeper truths that most people are content to ignore. And this is why intelligent people often find themselves on the receiving end of attacks. It's not because they're wrong, it's because they're right. And being right in a world that thrives on illusions is dangerous. Think of it this way. Society is built on a set of unspoken agreements. Agreements about what's true, what's acceptable, and what's off limits. Intelligent people, by their very nature, question these agreements. They refuse to take things at face value. They dig deeper. They ask questions that make others uncomfortable. And when they do, the herd reacts. They label you as arrogant, difficult, disruptive. Not because you're wrong, but because you refuse to play by their rules. So what does this all mean? It means that if you're someone who thinks deeply, who asks difficult questions, who challenges the norms of society, you will inevitably face resistance. People will try to tear you down, to discredit you, to make you feel small. But this resistance isn't about you, it's about them. It's about their fear of being exposed. Their fear of confronting the uncomfortable truths that you, through your intelligence, have brought to light. But this isn't new. History is filled with examples of intelligent people being silenced, ostracized, or ridiculed for daring to think differently. And while society has become more subtle in its methods, the underlying dynamics remain the same. So why does society react this way? Why does your intelligence trigger their defense mechanisms? Let's uncover the 3 ancient psychological traps society uses to silence you. The first trap is the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a cognitive bias, where individuals with low competence in a particular area overestimate their abilities. Essentially, the less someone knows, the more confident they are in their supposed expertise. Now imagine what happens when you, someone with genuine competence, enter the picture. Your intelligence, your ability to see things clearly, exposes the limits of their understanding. It threatens their inflated self-image. And instead of admitting their ignorance, they double down on their delusion. They react by undermining you, by dismissing your ideas, and by making you seem arrogant or condescending. This isn't because you're wrong, it's because their fragile ego can't handle the truth. Your competence highlights their incompetence, and that's a reality they're not prepared to face. The second trap is projection. This is a defense mechanism where people attribute their own insecurities and flaws onto others. When someone calls you arrogant or pretentious, it's often a reflection of their own internal struggles. They see in you what they don't want to acknowledge in themselves. Your intelligence, your confidence, your ability to think critically reminds them of their own shortcomings. And instead of working on themselves, they project their insecurities onto you. By labeling you as the problem, they avoid confronting the fact that they are the ones who feel inferior. It's easier to tear you down than to face their own inadequacies. Finally, there's the trap of tribal shaming. Human beings are social creatures, hardwired to belong to groups or tribes. When you think differently, when you step outside the intellectual boundaries of the tribe, the group responds by trying to pull you back in. They call you weird, eccentric, or out of touch. The goal is to make you feel like an outsider, to shame you into conforming to the group's way of thinking. Tribal shaming isn't about proving you wrong. It's about enforcing conformity. It's about making you feel uncomfortable for daring to be different. But here's the thing. The greatest thinkers in history, the people who truly changed the world, were always outsiders. They were always seen as weird or different because they refused to conform to the limitations of the tribe. Each of these traps, the Dunning-Kruger effect, projection, and tribal shaming, are psychological tools society uses to keep you in line. They are mechanisms designed to protect the herd from the disruption that intelligence brings. But here's the truth. These traps only have power if you let them. The moment you recognize them for what they are, you can free yourself from their grip. You can see through the attacks, the ridicule, the labels, and understand that they're not about you. They're about the insecurities of those around you. Now, how do you protect yourself? The answer lies in history's greatest minds. Let's explore how the world's most brilliant thinkers navigated these traps and emerged stronger. Jordan Peterson's solution to thriving as a thinker? Stop seeking approval from the very people who fear or misunderstand you. It's tempting to want validation, to desire acceptance from those around you. But here's the hard truth. If you're truly intelligent, if you're a deep thinker who challenges the norms, approval from the masses will never come. And that's okay. Nietzsche captured this reality perfectly when he said, "The higher you soar, the smaller you appear to those who cannot fly." This is a profound insight into how society views those who rise above mediocrity. The higher you elevate your thoughts, your ideas, and your understanding, the less relatable you become to the people who are content with staying on the ground. The key to thriving as a thinker is to embrace this isolation, to use the fear and resistance you face as fuel for your journey. Look at history's greatest minds, geniuses who changed the world through their ideas. They weren't celebrated for fitting in, they were celebrated for standing out. But make no mistake, standing out comes with a price. People like Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and even modern innovators faced immense resistance, and in many cases, outright rejection. Take Steve Jobs, for example. The man who revolutionized technology, reshaped industries, and built one of the most iconic companies in history, Apple, wasn't always seen as a visionary. In fact, he was fired from the very company he founded. People called him difficult, stubborn, and impossible to work with. But here's the thing. Jobs didn't let society's rejection define him. He used it to his advantage. He harnessed the criticism, the doubts, and the failures as fuel to push his ideas even further. That's the mentality you need to cultivate as a thinker. Your intelligence isn't a flaw, it's a weapon. But like any weapon, it's only powerful if you know how to wield it. Then there's Einstein, often revered today as one of the greatest scientific minds in history. But during his youth, Einstein was labeled a lazy rebel. His teachers thought he was unmotivated, lacking the discipline to succeed. They couldn't see the genius that lay beneath the surface of his unconventional approach to learning. And yet, it was precisely his willingness to think differently, to reject the rigid structures of formal education, that led him to develop the theory of relativity and fundamentally change our understanding of the universe. Einstein's brilliance wasn't recognized in its time. He was seen as an outsider, a misfit, someone who didn't play by the rules. And yet, it was his ability to break free from those rules that made him one of the most celebrated thinkers of all time. The lesson here is clear. If you're going to thrive as a thinker, you need to stop looking for approval from people who are committed to staying comfortable. The truth is, your intelligence will always make people uncomfortable because it forces them to confront their own limitations. But instead of letting that discomfort isolate you or make you feel like something's wrong with you, use it to your advantage. When people fear or reject your ideas, that's a sign you're on the right path. It means you're thinking beyond what's expected, beyond what's familiar, and that's where true innovation and progress happen. The world doesn't change because of people who play it safe. It changes because of people who dare to think differently, who dare to challenge the status quo, who aren't afraid to be misunderstood. So, if you want to thrive as a thinker, embrace the resistance. Don't let it silence you, let it sharpen you. Every time someone tells you that you're too critical, too intense, or too unconventional, take it as a compliment. It means you're thinking on a level that others can't reach. And here's the best part. The very traits that make you a threat to the herd are the same traits that will make you successful in the long run. Your ability to see things differently, to ask the questions others are too afraid to ask, to push boundaries and explore uncharted territory. That's what sets you apart. That's what will allow you to achieve things that others can't even imagine. But remember, intelligence alone isn't enough. You have to learn how to wield it effectively. That means being strategic, knowing when to challenge and when to observe, when to push forward and when to pull back. It's about playing the long game, about knowing that the world may not recognize your brilliance today, but in time it will. So use their fear as fuel. Let the resistance drive you forward. Don't seek approval, seek truth. And remember, the higher you soar, the fewer people will be able to understand your perspective. But that's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of greatness. You weren't meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out. If this video resonated with you and you felt the weight of being misunderstood or rejected for thinking differently, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more content. Let's prove society wrong together. And now, it's your turn. Comment below, what's one truth you've been afraid to say aloud? I'll personally respond to the most courageous answers. This is a community for thinkers who refuse to conform, for people who are willing to ask the tough questions and challenge the norms. Next video, how to manipulate the manipulators, Sun Tzu's dark psychology. You don't want to miss it. Stay dangerous.